Welcome back to this continuing coverage of extraordinary session of the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers. Viewers, you have already seen the speeches that were made during the inaugural session. In a short while, the proceedings are going to continue in a closed session, an in-camera session, and there actually lies the entire plan of action. But so far we have seen that the statements that we saw offered some very creative ideas, particularly coming from IDP. IDB's head was the idea of this important financial setup that could perhaps bail out Afghanistan. And we saw a pledge from Saudi Arabia as well, worth 1 billion rial. We are going to talk about these matters, and then of course the key expectations from the meeting and also how it is going to impact Afghanistan. Remember, Afghanistan's 22.5 million population is either has been actually affected by the drought or the civil war or the economic crisis. We are going to talk about all these matters, and in order to help us understand these issues, I'm joined by a very, very accomplished panel. Professor Dr. Ejaz Akram joins us, who is a professor on religious and world politics affairs, and he's also the chairman of Rahmatul Alameen Authority. And he has written books. One of those books is Ideals and Realities of Regional Integration in the Muslim World, exactly on the subject that we are seeing at this moment. Thank you very much, Professor, for being part of the program. Next to him is Air Commodore retired Basit Raza Abbasi, senior analyst, a defense expert. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. And then we have Dr. Amna Mehmood, who is a pedagogue, again a professor, an expert on foreign affairs. Thank you very much, ma'am, for being part of the program. Let me start with you, Dr. Ejaz. Let me ask you, what are your expectations from today's proceedings and how that actually helps Afghanistan right now?
Yes. The first expectation, of course, is that the recognition of Afghanistan's aid, which was blocked. They have a tough winter ahead, so they have enough food and shelter and clothing. So that's number one. Second, also that the Afghanistan government, the new Afghan government, should be recognized, primarily by the neighbors of Afghanistan, followed by would be Russia and China, for the following 4 reasons. First is de facto, that they are in control of things. So the occupying forces have been gone and they have formed a government. Second is de jure. Do they have the right to form the government? That's where it can be disputed by some people in Afghanistan and the world community. And see, the world community says, well, it's not inclusive enough, which in my opinion is wrong, because I think this government is more inclusive than the last one, because the last one had marginalized about 60% of the Pashtuns who were Taliban and had formed a government with the remainder with some nominal Pashtuns. This one has all those 60% back plus more, so this may be about 80% inclusive compared to the last one. And last 2 points is that this government is certainly pro-BRI and CPEC as compared to the last one. And finally, this government is homegrown. It's not been installed as a puppet from outside. So
all these 4 expectations, how do they help Afghanistan's people right now? You were talking about approaching winters. They're sitting in winters. These are winters, right? So how do you actually?
In this, I think that the money that is, if these 57 countries have any clout in Washington, and some do, they should implore Washington, D.C. to release the funds for the Afghan government. If they are incapable of doing so, and it's conceivable that they might be, then of course it is not that difficult for all of the 57 countries to come up with a couple of $1 billion. They can literally sneeze it out.
And you're very kind that you also gave us a dollar figure, a couple of billions, right? And that is quite an intriguing number. We are going to explore that as well, but let me bring in Air Commodore Saab. Your take on this, sir. And the problem is, even if you pledge monies, where is the distribution mechanism? And then there is the issue of Afghanistan not being represented all over the world. The representative to the UN that was actually hailed from the previous government stepped down on 15th of this month. So now at this moment there is an empty chair at the UN. Everyone might be talking about Afghanistan, but the Afghan government will not be there. So how do you actually tackle all these things?
Actually, I would put the objective of this conference a short term and the long term.
Right.
The short term and immediate, of course, needs humanitarian assistance,
right,
because it's a number 106 in global hunger index.
Right.
Afghanistan
and then salaries also.
That's right. The people are not getting paid, so they have nothing to buy food or things. So they are selling their household goods. I mean,
right,
it's a very pathetic situation.
Yeah.
And it's not of their own doing. It's because of the occupying forces, those who are sitting there for the last 20 years.
Right.
It's their steps and their actions which have left this economy in tatters, which has destroyed the infrastructure completely. And in fact, it has fragmented the Afghan polity,
right,
which was perhaps more cohesive before these guys entered there.
Regardless of what happened in the past, let us
right,
focus on a roadmap at this moment.
That's
right.
right. So now the immediate is how, what sort of to develop a consensus so that people can pool in their resources and go for Afghans' help. And second, the mechanism for that aid which is pledged,
right,
to reach the people who need it.
Right.
And we just heard in the IDBP chairman, he actually offered that mechanism. So if there is a consensus, this will be a good way to meet the immediate problem.
Right.
And the long term would be those recognition and other things, they can wait. But this is
right,
the immediate
and,
step.
and when I come back to you, I'm going to actually explore this aspect of long-term commitments, whether they can, wait or not, because there are many elements which might seem common, but they are not. We'll have to disentangle them. Before that, and before I go to Dr. Amna, I'm told that we have a sound bite of the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, who actually is identifying 6 points that are needed for an effective strategy. Let us watch that first.
Propose a 6-point framework for the OIC to lead. First, we could create a vehicle within the OIC to channel immediate and sustained humanitarian and financial support to the Afghan people, including from pledges by the OIC member states and other donors. Second, we should agree to increase investment in the people of Afghanistan bilaterally or through the OIC in areas such as education, health, technical and vocational skills to the Afghan youth. Third, a group of experts comprising the OIC, the United Nations, and the IFIs be established to consider ways and means to facilitate Afghanistan's access to legitimate banking services and to ease the serious liquidity challenge of the Afghan people. Fourth, we should focus on enhancing food security of the Afghan people. The Islamic Organization for Food Security can and must lead this effort. Fifth, invest in building capacity of Afghan institutions in countering terrorism and combating illicit trade in narcotics. Finally, engage with Afghan authorities to help meet the expectations of the international community, in particular, regarding political and social inclusivity, respect for human rights, especially the rights of women and girls, and combating terrorism.
Right. So these are 6 very important points. They were pithy points, and because although it was on number 4, food security, but because the contingent factor being poverty and displacement in Afghanistan, we have to actually focus on that as well. I have to come back to you, Komodo Saab, as I promised. But you'll have to tell me, because the foreign minister was suggested that Islamic Organization for Food Security can help there. The question is, we know that world organizations like UN's subsidiaries and then, of course, other institutions, NGOs are there. But do we have Islamic Organization for Food Security's network in Afghanistan?
I think they have a setup of humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan.
In Kabul?
This is what I heard from the representative who is here.
Yeah.
I remember he said that we can use this mechanism to channelize the money and resources into Afghanistan.
Right.
So that gives a lot of hope. In fact, his speech was quite significant, and if that works, as I just said, that this is the first step, that how can this be pooled and how can it be channelized into Afghanistan.
Right.
And second is to bridge this gap, this difference between what the world expects from the Afghans and what the Afghans are willing to or able to do at the moment.
Right. And in these 6 points, Dr. Amna, Foreign Minister, actually covered all those aspects. 6th point was about meeting expectations and laying down some kind of institutional mechanism to ensure that those rights are given. But last I checked, while education might be a human right, for access to food and the right to live is also a human right, right? If a girl is dying of hunger, can you tell her that we are sanctioning you just because you cannot go to school?
Obviously, it is ironical that the world is stressing on education, but they are not stressing on the right of survival of those people for whom they are asking for education. If they would have food, basic access to basic facilities for survival, you know, they are not having
food, medicine, shelter.
Yeah, exactly. They are not having enough clothing for this harsh summer, for harsh winter, and then not enough food to meet their basic requirements and not shelter, then what to talk about their education? It is ridiculous. Secondly, Farooq, we don't want to talk about what has been happening in the past, but you know that the roots are there, the presence of…
you can talk about anything you want. The only thing is we are bringing an economy.
Exactly.
So there is economy of time also. I wanted to actually focus on creative solutions.
So they did not focus on humanitarian aspect of addressing terrorism. Terrorism is having its root because of deprivation among the people. And those deprivations were not addressed during the period of 20 years when the sophisticated world experts were there and they have all the facilities and access to all resources and to establish all these facilities for the people. But right now what we are trying to, and as you were asking to my colleagues as well, that recognition comes first over the matter of survival. Obviously, food security comes first for those people who are going to survive, and then we are going to acknowledge their government or not, whether as de facto, though they are de facto government, and it is not the matter of their survival, it is the matter of survival of Afghan nation. 40 million people, and 40 million people are, most of them are the Muslims, regardless of their ethnic composition.
One very quick question, because you are an expert on international relations. You said they are the de facto government, not de jure government, right? The question at this moment is that the previous government also came in existence through bond process and the US intervention. This one came as a result of Doha process.
Exactly.
If there is some kind of document that is there that engages Taliban as a legitimate authority, don't you think that at least on paper the US has already conceded that they are de jure authority?
When you make one sit across the table for negotiation, you accept its legitimacy as the representative of that nation. Obviously, they have right, but they have de facto access to all resources, and as Professor Akram pointed out that it is more inclusive as compared to any previous government during the last 20 years. And when you will accept them as de facto, then you may negotiate the later process that how they can be recognized at de jure level.
Yeah, but the problem with de facto is that as long as they are not recognized, you cannot do anything about the central bank. Central bank is in their control, and till the time you don't operationalize central bank, sir, Dr. Akram, we cannot have the salaries being paid because banking system depends on that. Right. So how do you actually square that circle?
Yeah, that's the very fundamental, you touch on a very important point, is a central bank. And Pakistan has the same problem. Is a reason that these 57 countries that are here, very few of them are actually autonomous, sovereign, and fully independent for the very reason that you mentioned. And see, 6 points that the FM has just pointed out. The last point, which is meeting expectations of the international community cannot be fulfilled, or others can be fulfilled. And the reason for the last one not being fulfilled because the international community is not the international community. It's just a group of nations that are very powerful, have been powerful since World War II, and now there are others that have risen, such as Russia, China, and the key countries of the Islamic world, that challenge and rival this status quo. So, as far as the food capacity and experts in banking field and the increased investment, humanitarian, all of them are being done, and they can very easily be done, in which Afghanistan actually has enough wherewithal for 1 year to survive. Keep in mind also that even when China came about, nobody recognized it for many years.
Right. Yeah.
And so these things will take time, and I think that there's no urgent rush. I mean, if Afghan Taliban had not taken over Afghanistan and it was still the Ashraf Ghani government, this would not be in the news that Afghanistan is about to die of hunger, poverty, of malnutrition.
Yeah, but you realize, Dr. Saab, that we have been talking about Afghans and their rights and particularly decolonization and everything, right? So what matters here? The people on the streets.
Right.
And a lot of them are displaced, homeless, shelterless, and prone to this weather. They cannot be abandoned. So you need some kind of process to actually take care of it. And regarding the commitments, the last point, the expectations are, there are two packets, right? One is at the Doha process. The other one was the Troika Plus. That includes Russia, America, China, ETIM, IMU, TTP with us. So you have to actually take care of them as well.
Yeah, if you look at the from the food, shelter, and clothing perspective, food is indeed a legitimate thing, that they have now less money to buy it from outside. Afghanistan only has capacity to feed about 12-13% of its people indigenously. Rest of it we must import from Pakistan or elsewhere. So. But as far as their precariousness, the scenario of their precariousness is concerned, is a little bit overblown in the media, because last year it was the same winter and everybody had the same amount of
displacement?
No, displacement is new. Some of it is new, but some of it was there last year as well.
Yeah, but the compounding factors are a central banking system which has failed, currency which is shooting down, and then the price of commodities which goes up, and people don't have the purchasing capacity.
Yes,
that becomes a problem.
That is it, and that right now in the days of Corona is world over, including Pakistan, and certainly Afghanistan is going to be hit, which is why China has actually doled out quite a bit of money for the next 2 months.
But how much?
I think it was some maybe 30 million or something like that. There should be enough to buy, and then wheat was procured by from India through Pakistan. And so we have to maybe another, if they had about $50 million at this stage, I think they could see themselves through June.
Right.
In terms of food.
We heard from various UN bodies that Afghanistan at least needs $700 million by the end of January for the people to survive these winters. So we are going to talk about that as well, but first let us listen into the Prime Minister's statement. There are clips that you will watch. Let's listen in.
Is that if the world does not act, this will be the biggest man-made crisis which is unfolding in front of us. We, the OIC, it's a big responsibility on us, because not only the situation in Afghanistan as it unfolds, but it's a religious duty to help them. No country has suffered as much as Afghanistan. 40 years of conflict. And then add to it recently prolonged drought, 75% of the people living off the land. And then, even before 15th of August, half the population below the poverty line. Years of corrupt governance. 75% of the budget supported by foreign aid. Now, a country in this situation, after 15th August, if the foreign aid dries up, the foreign reserves get frozen, banking system freezes, any country is going to collapse. I speak to the United States specifically. They must de-link the Taliban government from the 40 million Afghan citizens. Even if they have, they've been in conflict with Taliban for 20 years. But this is a question of the people of Afghanistan. It is very important that action is taken immediately. Already we are late. The Afghan winter, everyone knows, is extremely severe. Afghanistan is heading for chaos. But chaos suits no one.
Prime Minister of Pakistan was talking about the state of affairs in Afghanistan. Particularly, one very important point that he highlighted was corruption of the previous government. And it must amaze everybody, regardless of what you read in the cigar reports that kept on coming and told us how much money went down the sink. But the president actually, the former president, resigns and leaves with millions of dollars. So, I mean, corruption was astounding. But what do we do now? Because those reserves, Afghan reserves that are in New York, elsewhere, are still frozen. The currency it cannot be patented because it used to be patented either in UK or then in Poland. So this amazing kind of setup is such that you have to find a solution afterwards as well. And that is the thing that I'm actually going to talk about here, Commodore Saab. Right now, first part is the pledges or the money that is committed. Second part is money is an idea, right? A value. Then you convert it into some kind of goods, services, and transfer them to Afghan people. I understand that the international community tried to remonetize certain banks, but they have placed monies there, and yet, because those banks are not functioning, people cannot withdraw money. So essentially, currency is going nowhere. How do you solve all these problems without recognizing the administration which is there?
This is what I emphasized previously, that there has to be this gap has to be bridged between what Afghans are able to do, what they want to do, and what they are able to do,
right,
and what the world expects. Unless this gap is bridged, there cannot be real progress. You can, like this meeting, you can call for help, and these are SOS calls, and naturally people, God-fearing people would respond. But this is not how a country runs. It needs stable economic system, the banking system, the infrastructure, and all this, where the technology and the resources, financial and manpower. So this is essential, that now that all these countries, these heads are assembled here, they should, while we are demanding from rest of the world to come out and help the Afghan, we need to demand it from the representatives of the Afghan government. The foreign minister is sitting there, that they must act quickly and fulfill their own promises. They pledge that they will have an inclusive government.
Look,
the rights of
hang on. You know, you have actually appeared in my previous programs, and I have no ambiguity about the fact that if you commit something in Doha or elsewhere, you should fulfill it, right? And essentially, because that is about human lives, it is important. But humble submission is, you're talking about fulfilling something that you don't have verification mechanism for. One. Two, you don't have the time for. And then the people who are suffering right now. What do you do then? I mean, whatever you're going to do with the Afghan government is your take, right? You can do it in 2 months, 5 months, 2 years, 5 years. But right now, the people are suffering. There are people who are providing services at health facilities. They are not being paid. So how do you actually take care of that problem?
This might be taken care of through the good office of this forum.
How?
Because people are pledging money.
No, that I understand.
Yes.
But in order to pay people, the money has to come from the government, because they are services which are, these people are engaged by the government, right? You can't tell NGOs to go and pay all these people, because those NGOs don't owe them anything.
That's right.
So how do you actually work this out?
This is really a problem, and but I think this it has to go through. Ideally, it should go through banking system,
Right.
and that banking system is frozen at the moment.
And it cannot function without the central bank.
Exactly. So some sort of understanding has to be reached. Some
Right.
sort of commitments have to be made by both
De facto
parties.
or de jure?
De jure.
Okay.
Because they are the ones who are running the show, and
Right.
they have the responsibility to their own people to make sure that their difficulties are ameliorated,
Right.
and they get food, clothing and shelter in
Right.
the medical services.
So, Dr. Amna, we were looking at various, suggestions that keep on coming in, especially from the international media, from the intellectuals. And while we were listening and absorbing that, one realized that most of them actually do two things. One, bypass the Afghan government. They create some kind of mechanism which is parallel to the government. And two, most of them are unprecedented when you talk about the scale and the scope of the entire thing. When you can do this, there is an empty chair at the UN since 15th of this month, right, where Afghanistan is not there. And then Afghanistan's current government cannot be engaged because it has not recognized. How can you transfer the frozen currency it reserves to someone who is not government? Yeah. So at this moment, is there a possibility of creating a new precedent of giving some government, or whichever government it is, temporary legitimacy? I mean, 6 months and then we will review it?
Yes, I think that because we are talking about the human sufferings and we want to address the humanitarian crisis, in 6 months maybe half of the population of Afghans would be out of this world,
Right.
because they won't be able to survive. And we are trying to address the humanitarian crisis. And we are talking about the absolute corruption and lack of mechanism that was also there in the presence of NATO forces as well,
Right.
in
Cigar
the presence
reports.
of last government. And
Harrowing reports.
And I wonder that the banking system in Afghanistan is having everybody is having access to that banking system as well. To my knowledge, most of the money was disseminated through unconventional means and without banking system.
No,
and
no,
that
you're
was
talking about money being given to the warlords. I'm
Exactly.
talking about that
And
is
then-
given to the
then,
common people.
It was distributed at their goodwill to the people of Afghanistan. That's why this deprivation is there. Otherwise, they would have some.
No, warlords never used to share the money.
Yeah, exactly. And that happens everywhere. When you trust on warlords and don't address the problems of the people, it happens as
Right.
is happening in Afghanistan. So I think that would be the option, that can be the option, and at least for OIC and Muslim community, we don't stress directly to the rest of the world. But if immediate neighbors and the regional powers like Russia and China, they recognize, then I think that they can compel United States to unfrozen those
Unfreeze those accounts.
Yes,
Yeah.
those frozen sources. Because
Yeah,
I
but,
think
but again, Dr. Sahaba.
Farooq, I want to talk about this, that who gave the right to United States to freeze the assets of Afghan people? These assets are they don't belong to the government of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
they
but you
belong to
are
the people
asking
of Pakistan.
you're asking an interesting question, but I would have approached it in a different way.
Yeah.
Right or not, they have the money, right? The question is, why does this money actually lie there?
Exactly.
Why is it that you need to go to UK and then Poland to get your currency printed?
Exactly.
And why is it that nobody was asking why it is happening?
They don't have right to take this money because they were here
My
to
humble summation
address
is you are 20 years too late
20
to ask
years.
that question.
But we have been
that they
asking
don't
this
have any
question.
right.
But this matter was not exposed to international community. Right now, we are talking about this, that currency is printed in Poland and UK. And you know, these are all partnerships are for looting purposes. It means not for the rehabilitation and addressing the terrorist problem there in Afghanistan. So there must be some mechanism to legitimize the government, at least for probationary period, to give humanitarian aid to.
Is there a precedent?
If not, that it can work.
Can it happen under the existing international law?
Yes, yes, obviously. If you recognize, if you recall back the recognition of China, as Dr. was referring, in 1970, there was a communique signed by President of United States.
And we all know about that.
And at that time, the government of People's Republic of China was not internationally recognized by the UN or any other country except Pakistan and Romania.
And then a very interesting thing happened, that Taiwan's delegation actually walks out.
Yes.
And then China walks in.
Exactly.
And it is recognized.
But US
Can
signed,
this happen now? Who decides who gets the membership? Or who is the legitimate representative of a country? Is it the Secretary General of the UN?
Yes.
Or is it UNSC?
UNGA.
UNGA. There's going to be voting about.
That is, UNGA is the instrument that decides the membership of any country that has to enter into United States, into UN. And
no, country is there.
Yes.
A seat is there.
Yes.
But who actually legitimizes or ensures or verifies the legitimacy of a candidate?
Since UNGA grants, so the Secretary General should decide.
Secretary General or President of UNGA?
In anticipation.
No,
in anticipation. And they can get approval from
UNGA has its own president. So, Secretary General or UNGA's president?
I think UNGA is the instrument to decide, and Secretary General can take decision in anticipation immediately.
Because he takes care of the executive side. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes, first on the banking system, and then on the legitimacy of what are the mechanisms of how the Afghan Taliban government can be legitimized. There is you can talk of partial legitimacy or temporary legitimacy, but that would eventually mean permanent one.
Right.
And if that is contingent upon satisfying the international community, that can never be, because the international community actually would not be satisfied until these people, Taliban, they lose their own essential identity and their beliefs and values. So that's a very difficult thing to negotiate. The legitimacy issue is
can we revisit that identity also? Because that is very important. You're talking about them conceding on certain things, right?
Right.
But my argument would be that at Doha, when this document was being signed, they had already conceded that. So if they can do it, fine. They only have to fulfill their own promises. There should be a verification mechanism, and that's all.
Yes, the United States of America, which is leading this, is a highly unreliable entity to deal with. They break their promises, they go back on their deals, so there's no point. For the Taliban are very clever now. They are only using realpolitik to wade through this problem, and so they couldn't care less about what the Americans think, to be very honest with you. The reason the OIC moot has been called this time is to raise emergency funds so that they can go through the winter, and also as you know, that OIC has hardly been successful at anything of substance.
But you can say the same thing about UN, other bodies where you have voting members.
Yeah, in the UN has a lot more success. Let's say in the United States, United Nations agriculture programs, some things to do with WHO, low politics.
Development.
Low politics, the UN is very successful. The OIC is not even very successful in low politics. So, I mean, even let's, ISESCO or the education and cultural things, very dormant. I mean, the OIC is very dormant. And the reason for that is dependence, that they are dependent primarily on those entities that do not promote unity, integration, and connectivity.
Right.
But now, as we see that there are two parallel systems developing, there is the Western Titanic that is sinking, begun to sink, and then there is the China, Russia-led world with the key countries of the Islamic world and the eastern side, which are now buoyant and they're coming up as very, especially in economically, but also in defense.
Okay.
So when now concomitant to these events is happening is two parallel banking systems,
Right.
which did not start today, but Russia and China have been bartering since decades now, bypassing the dollar. Turkey talks about de-dollarization. Iran is out of that loop. Some other Asian countries are considering, and Pakistan is now doing directly transactions in renminbi, in yuan.
Yeah.
So if the $9 billion that the United States has usurped of the Afghan people, they can continue to sit on it just the way they had sat on our F-16s long time ago. So they do these kinds of
And then
things.
we got wheat, I think.
Yeah, so
As a concession,
later on maybe they might give something, but this doesn't matter. So if we move towards solutions, I think the solution will be China-led, and I think that the Taliban are very clear that the cheapest builder of infrastructure in this region, which was destroyed by the West, will be China. Their firms will outbid every other firm.
And I love professors who actually are too certain about things, right? And you are talking about a changing world order and everything. With due respect, I have two notes here. One, IR has been failing in predicting anything serious for past 50 years, especially the fall of Soviet Union. And secondly, we still haven't worked out what kind of integrated or competitive world it is going to be. We see all the rhetoric coming. So all these moving parts, can we trust the future of an entire nation on these very important and perhaps real assumptions?
Yes, they don't have a choice. Which are the actors that they have to deal with? So somebody has to rebuild Afghanistan, and somebody who has the money has to put up the money. And what do the Afghans make in return? Well, they're sitting on trillions of dollars of wealth.
Right.
And so if
you're talking about things that are underground.
That are underground, but you can they would trust the Chinese companies would actually come in and not be engaged in subversion, and there's no such guarantee if there's firms from UK or USA or other parts of the Western world come in.
And do we have
they would
any
be
guarantees that those companies are going to come?
Of the Chinese?
Yeah,
it depends on peace.
But it depends on certain things.
It depends on peace. If the Afghans can actually assure peace, which means they can obliterate all of the terrorism from this area, those companies are ready to come.
But doctors have too many ifs and buts, right? And that becomes a problem.
Security is actually the only one.
But that is also, ETIM is also a big concern. Let me ask Commodore Saab if you want to actually comment on what was said earlier. And then we can talk about modalities of dispensing with all the aid. And then IDB's head actually came up with the idea of a trust, right? It brought me back to a very interesting transaction that was happening with Iran and India. When Iran was and still is under sanctions, and it still was selling its oil to India, they couldn't give them the monies. But what they did was they deposited in a escrow account, right? Can this Saudi or IDB trust be that kind of escrow, that those $9.5 billion can be released to them in their custody, and eventually it can make it to the Afghan government whenever it is validated? Until then, against that money, there can be assurances and some kind of aid or something else.
That kind of mechanism was successful with India because they could they were taking oil from them, and the Indian goods were going to Iran.
Indian money was supposed to go, but they actually submitted in an account that was in India, not in Iran.
That's right. But we were talking about giving some interim legitimacy.
Right.
One probable way to do that would be to reach a sort of consensus. Again, I would refer to the bridging the gap between the world expectation and what Afghans are ready to do. And give a time frame, let's say 1 year, that do this, and the Afghan government should agree to doing
1
that.
year?
1 year.
You're talking about mechanisms,
No.
verification mechanism, and a timeline,
Exactly.
a roadmap.
Exactly.
3 things.
Yes, because all this, because
Again,
there's
3
a time-
moving parts. Salaries are not being paid
No,
now.
no. Once this agreement takes place, that in 1 year all these steps will be actioned. So that is the time for all the world community to pool in resources, related reach of Afghanistan, and the functional system for 1 year.
Okay.
But with a clear understanding that if the expectations which have been promised are not by that time, I think this is sufficient time. And many times the Afghan government has asked that they need more time. So let the world give time. This is so many, all the representatives of the world are sitting here
Time
in
to do
Islamabad.
what, sir? Time to do what?
Time to meet world expectation, which should now again be spelled out
Right.
and agreed between the Afghan government representatives and this through the August office of this OIC.
Right. So you agree in principle with whatever the foreign minister was outlining in his 6 points?
I can't
Because
think of-
your points actually really, I felt that it reminded me of those 6 points, right?
But my only point is that you are talking of legitimacy. However, there are some powers in this world who are above the law. They create their own laws to their own
Like
convenience.
which one?
Like the United States. I mean, they
They
would.
make laws.
But you know, when the human rights violations take ad
So
nauseum,
they accordingly
in India,
adjust the
they are
international
looking
law?
the other way. They are not even observing. They are not noticing it.
yeah.
And if one incident takes Pakistan, there is so much of hue and cry. So this is what I am saying. So let's be aware, let's be cognizant of these restrictions. We are not living in an altruistic world. It's not a world which everything is run by laws.
No free
We have to-
lunches.
yes, we have to find our way and find a way for the Afghans to survive.
Okay.
And also sort of modify their stance. Of course, they have fought for something. They haven't
but
lost so many lives for 20 years for nothing.
My
So they want their
problem
system.
with this modifying stance and everything is that it is like stopping a train. It still will keep cascading for a while and then it will do something. The people who are suffering, at least the reports that I heard from the ICRC's head yesterday, was essentially that people are dying right now. And they have the network. All they need is the international community's collective will to help people out.
This is exactly what I meant, that they will give a reprieve for 1 year. If this consensus is reached, they will have their functional system. The systems which are frozen will be unfrozen for at least 1 year. And this will be enough time for them to prove themselves and let this process of aid reaching Afghans continue
Right.
for 1 year unimpeded.
All right. Dr. Amna, we kept on talking about your discipline quite a bit. If you want to come in and comment on those things that we were discussing, please do.
Yeah, exactly. I agree that there should be some mechanism for legitimizing the government, but obviously I agree with there should be mechanism to address human miseries immediately, and there is no question about it. Secondly, I agree with the point that US is actually making hostage to the UN, and you know the Mehmood's point of view that no hegemon allow the other hegemon to come into question or into challenge. And you know, in this region, the policies of United States are giving way the entry of China. And as Professor Akram was pointing out, that China and Russia is the option, and they would enter if there would be security and there would be less terrorism. But I think that it is inevitable for China to address insecurity and address terrorism in Afghanistan to secure their
How?
CPAC and BRI.
No, they haven't started on BRI there right now.
They have intervened. They have intervened. You know, you see that they have recognized practically by
I'm saying that
receiving Taliban.
BRI has not been extended to Afghanistan right now. It
That
will
has to be. That has to be. If it is not, then even a volatile Afghanistan can export terrorism in both directions to Pakistan and to Central Asia
And China
and
elsewhere.
evenly,
Yeah.
you know, it was a threat. So it is inevitable for China to address the terrorism and all insecurities and all these
And this
insecurities.
is what I'm asking, how?
How obviously they would intervene humanitarian.
Kinetically?
Kinetically, they can intervene through soft power.
That won't be kinetic then.
Kinetic means that they
It
can
will
give
be kinetic.
support to their armies, they can support to their police and mechanism to address the.
Which police? Taliban police or some other police?
Obviously Taliban.
Previous one has
you
gone
have
away.
seen that they have de facto recognition, they have extended to Taliban, they have received them first time in Beijing, and the whole world have seen. But now they are quiet, they are watching the world response.
This is my problem, right? I understand that interaction that took place between mullahs who went there, right, and Chinese foreign minister. Everyone saw that. But why is it that we haven't heard more about it? We have seen some commitments. We haven't seen another visit where there could be some kind of joint venture, there could be actually some kind of inauguration of these projects
I
that
think,
you
I think
keep
that
on talking
this
about.
is the Chinese way to act. Chinese always keep silent. You have hardly seen that they did veto, use their veto power in United Nations Security Council. They are waiting for the world's response. Yes.
I'm not talking about any kind of public statement. One statement which is bigger than anything else. For example, our CPAC was, everybody was saying Pakistan cannot be invested into, right? And then they come with this humongous package. So money is the biggest speech, right? We haven't seen that speech coming either.
I think that if there would be no assistance from international community, China would intervene, because that would be the only option for them. Let this OIC meeting, as you say that we professors give verdict, but we are clear about many things.
But my question is not rhetorical, right? I'm asking you to identify certain timelines. You must have some idea when China can potentially come in and start investing and ensuring the stabilization.
I can offer something for
Yeah.
you if you want. I think as far as the timeline is concerned, next September, because the 19th CPC Congress will meet in September, and Xi Jinping's will be voted upon in the Politburo. And so a lot of these such big decisions as far as the timeline is concerned. Now, coming back to actually whether China has already helped or not is a very important one, because China, I think, has an understanding with the Taliban to increase their capacity using artificial intelligence, mechanism of AI, and human intelligence to actually identify the terrorist networks which were still present in Afghanistan.
Face identity and all that.
Or many other ways too. And these were primarily left over from the Indian support and the CIA and the 9 hostile intelligence agencies that work in Afghanistan. Many of them are still present, and some of their special forces are also present in Afghanistan. So it has to be kinetic, but the kinetic is not the Chinese boots on ground. It will be Chinese upgrading the capacity of the Taliban forces to enable that.
Right. Let us hope that whatever comes out of the OIC session actually starts delivering for the people of Afghanistan. So I'm told that we have to conclude this segment. Dr. Ejaz, Akram, thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Air Commodore retired Basit, Raza, Basit Saab. Thank you very much, sir. Especially because we spent a lot of time together today because of the interventions of time in the session. And Dr. Amna, Mehmood, thank you very much, ma'am, for being part of the program as well. Viewers, this special transmission continues, although I will beg leave, this concludes my segment so far, but it will continue with Faisal, Rehman in the chair. Keep watching PTV World. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.